Whether it's a cheesy soap opera,
people will mark us down if we appear to be more like a Days of Our Lives episode.
or a febrile reality show.
I note that Married at First Sight begins tonight. It's a bit like that with the relationships on the other side. You know they're going to end badly.
To most voters, it probably looks more like one battle after another. Queensland LNP backbencher Colin Boyce last week announced he would call for a party room vote on whether to spill David Littleproud's leadership. A challenge that, as expected, crashed and burned this afternoon.
There was a spill motion in the National Party room and it was unsuccessful.
If only that was the end of it all. With Parliament back tomorrow, Canberra is all about the ongoing leadership woes of both the Liberal and National parties. And another devastating poll showing an exodus of support to One Nation.
We are seeing a complete, restructure of politics in this country, a realignment of conservative forces and a complete collapse of the former coalition electorally.
More than 1 in 5 Australians say they would now vote for One Nation, which is the second most popular party behind Labor for the first time.
Anything in the mid-20s indicates to us that somewhere in the country, One Nation is polling in excess of 35% in a particular seat or particular seats. That will be largely in Queensland and regional New South Wales. And it'll be largely in National Party seats and LNP seats.
People are upset about where we are at the moment in the polls and the message that the Australian people are sending us. The reason we're there is because we have historic disunity in the coalition.
Susan Lee's factional wingman and numbers wrangler Alex Hawke is among Liberals pushing the Nationals to stop the split becoming permanent.
David Littleproud is on the verge of scoring the biggest own goal on the centre-right of Australian politics of all time.
But other Liberals think it's folly to reform the coalition so quickly.
We're not going to cycle through some desperate phase of saying, please come back. I mean, that's not going to happen, right? I mean, that would not be productive, and it would show that we're not focused on what our goal is, which is to win back seats, not exclusively, but largely in urban Australia where most people live.
A sticking point between the two leaders and their party rooms is whether to reinstate 3 frontbench Nationals who voted against the government's hate speech laws, contrary to the shadow cabinet position. 2 weeks ago, the Nationals withdrew from the coalition in retaliation.
I just can't see how we can have a coalition if the members of the coalition are penalised for voting in accordance with their own party room. It's not going to be viable long term.
I think to start with, let's put red lines aside. Let's sit down and begin constructively talking and working through the issues that led to where we got to.
Letting bygones be bygones is risky for Susan Lee, who can't be seen to be capitulating to the National Party demands. Without any real guarantee, they wouldn't again march out of the coalition if they don't get their way.
Just say this happens again.
Yeah.
Are you just going to keep breaking up?
No,
it sounds like a dysfunctional relationship.
This has happened in this century. This has been the second time it's happened.
With the Nationals' leadership settled, David Littleproud got the green light to negotiate with Susan Lee. But there's no certainty it'll be enough to bring back those disaffected coalition voters.
This is more about rejection of the two-party system and, above all else, no longer caring that whoever's in government, because they think their life's not going to change whatsoever. So they're basically just wanting to burn the place down.
Deputy Nationals Leader Kevin Hogan joins me now. Kevin Hogan, welcome.
Thanks, Sarah.
Have the leaders this evening agreed to put the coalition back together again?
Well, look, Sarah, what's happened tonight, we've had some preliminary chats, really our first formal chat, if you like, since the separation. And it happened with a lot of goodwill, a lot of cooperation. We had a chat about how we got to where we got to and the different perceptions on that, but obviously the path forward and how we can start to look at what the elephants in the room are for us and how we can try and resolve them, because there is a will within our room, the Nationals, and obviously the Liberal Party room, that we want to be a coalition again at some time in the future, because I believe, as a lot of people do, the best governments this country's had post-World War II are good coalition governments.
Just put the elephants aside for a moment. Will you be together in time for question time tomorrow or not?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into specifics. I mean, I suppose I would think that's probably unlikely. I mean, we've had a preliminary chat tonight. We've got things to discuss. We're going to take some ideas back to our party room and have a chat about them. But look, again, tonight was a really good, civil, cooperative and friendly chat.
Has Susan Lee agreed that the 3 senators who resigned should be reinstated?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into that, Sarah, because there's some conversations we're going to have going around that. But obviously that is one of the elephants in the room. We, as you know, without re-prosecuting 2 weeks ago, we were all going to vote against that legislation as Nationals, as shadow cabinet members. So we thought it was unfair that those 3 have to lose their job and those of us in the House of Reps not. Well, so that's why we resigned.
I mean, the only issue there, though, Kevin Hogan, is that at the time of that decision, your colleague, Mr Cadell, said, I am willing to take the consequences of my actions. So he seemed to accept that he had done wrong and there would be a price to pay.
Yes, but we obviously wanted to know, we had an idea that maybe they could be let go from that position and not have to, their resignations not be accepted because they voted on a party room position, a principled position that we arrived at. And it was only a technicality that we hadn't voted as well in the House of Reps. So it was like it was one out, it had to be all out, which is why we all resigned.
Let's just be clear though, is that a condition, the reinstatement of those senators, is that a condition for the coalition reforming or not?
Well, look, you know, as I talked about one of the elephants in the room, that is obviously a really important thing that we have to nut out and have a resolution on. That wasn't agreed tonight, but again, it was a good civil cooperative discussion. We've made a lot of progress. We're going to have further discussions as a party room tomorrow on that.
But is Susan Lee showing some willingness to move on that issue?
Look, Susan was very cooperative in the meeting tonight. And this was also, Sarah, as you can imagine, I mean, we've been through a tough time together as 2 separate parties who have been in coalition. So there was a frank conversation too about how they perceived where we got. We described how we perceived where we got there. No one went to Canberra 2 weeks ago, Sarah, believing the coalition was going to blow up that week. And no one wanted it to blow up that week when they went to Canberra. But we went down past, and I think there were some misunderstandings on both sides. And we had that frank conversation tonight too, which was really healthy.
What happens now then with the issue, the central issue of cabinet solidarity? Is that, have the Nationals agreed now to abide, or are they telling Susan Lee they're going to abide by that convention, or are you asking Susan Lee for the coalition agreement to be rewritten?
Again, that was really fully discussed tonight because, again, we have to look at it moving forward. They have put some ideas to us. We responded to that. We're going to take some of those ideas to our party room too so that we can agree with some of the guardrails of how they want it to operate going forward. And we want to do that in good faith because if we do, or when we do get back together, we don't want to keep revisiting this through the misunderstandings and some of the processes that happened 2 weeks ago. We don't want that to happen again when we get back together.
So, Kevin Hogan, what would that look like practically at the moment? You know, in the initial coalition agreement, it was very straightforward. Shadow cabinet solidarity is understood by all members. So what is Susan Lee offering you that could be a new version or a different version of that you could live with?
Well, some of it too, Sarah, just to backtrack to that. So that week, as you know, and most people know, was very extenuating circumstances, how Shadow Cabinet worked that week. There wasn't a joint party room. There were some processes. So we have a different interpretation of how that week rolled. But look, there's been clarification about how we both see that, but certainly moving forward now, how cabinet solidarity, shadow cabinet solidarity would work was very thoroughly discussed, and we're going to take some ideas back to our party room tomorrow.
So what is Susan Lee offering? Is she offering the Nationals the potential that they can present positions that are at odds with the Liberals' position within a future possible reunited coalition?
Well, with all due respect, Sarah, I can't go into that right now because there's positions we're going to take back to our party room. But what she put tonight, Susan Lee wants to find a solution to the current situation we have, and so do we. So that was the spirit of the conversation. Some of the questions you're asking are certainly the issues we discussed, and we've yet to resolve exactly where we sit. But there was good faith in the discussions, and we're going to talk about exactly those issues that you just raised.
Now, you say that Susan Lee has shown some good faith towards you. Your leader, David Littleproud, was emphatic in previous days that members of the Nationals could not serve under her leadership of a coalition. Has that position now firmly changed?
Well, David has said that in recent days as well. The context, look, I was at the press conference when David said that in Brisbane, and that was in the context because the previous questions had been about the acceptance of the resignation of those 3 senators, which was unacceptable to us, which we put a day before that if they were accepted, we would all have to resign from Cabinet as well. And we showed goodwill at that process as well. We abstained in the House of Reps to try and move our amendments in the Senate as a goodwill gesture as well, to try and get this to work when it was going through both houses of Parliament. But look, there's goodwill on both sides, and we want to resolve this. We think good government's good coalition government, and there's a real resolve on both sides to do this.
What's the cause of this present chaos, Kevin Hogan, if it isn't a failure of leadership on the part of David Littleproud as well as Susan Lee?
Well, look, Sarah, I think it's been a failure of communication. I think there was processes that happened that week that were quite extenuating. There were timelines that week that put a lot of pressure on party rooms about very serious, the hate speech laws, obviously tying with freedom of speech. There were some very serious issues there. We were under a timeline that we just didn't get to a point that we were comfortable with the bill. We took a principled position on that. And Sarah, I note that, I'm not complaining about this, but a principled decision that's cost all of us a shadow cabinet position at the moment and cost us money, but we're prepared to do that because that was a principle we had at the time.
You can talk about process, but I want to ask you frankly, Kevin Hogan, what you think the voters are making of the current situation.
Look, I agree that the voters would think, what is going on? I think initially they understood that we had a disagreement on the bill, and I think a lot of people supported us in the sense that they agreed with our position on the bill. But disagreeing on the bill shouldn't be unusual in this place. But I think what's happened, they would view it as miscommunication and a dysfunctional relationship, which I think right now we see that was that week, but we want to fix it.
Is there any wonder, do you think, that One Nation is surging even more in the polls when they see the mainstream Conservative parties at war with each other?
Yeah, look, I think One Nation has been surging in the polls probably. I think, Sarah, One Nation surge has coincided with Bondi. I think Bondi has changed the environment in Australia and the political landscape in Australia, and that's certainly something we have to acknowledge, but this certainly wouldn't have helped.
Do you accept that whatever their flaws, One Nation is at least demonstrating a strong and stable leadership?
Well, look, Pauline's been around a long time, Sarah, but look, I'd make the point that I think One Nation has had 40-odd MPs over the last 30 years across state parliaments, across federal parliament, and over 20 of them have left the party within 12 months or been forced to or left themselves. So, people will put more scrutiny on One Nation now they're coming into interview and polling well, and we'll see how that goes. But look, I'm a strong coalitionist. I want the coalition to be back together certainly before the next election. We have some issues to deal with, and we, in good faith, are trying to nut them out right now.
Why should the voters have faith that they won't see a repetition? This is now twice, Kevin Hogan. Why should the voters trust you that this isn't going to keep recurring, whatever the ideological fractures within the coalition mean, that we're not going to just see a repetition of this over the months ahead?
Sarah, very good question, and that's what we spoke about tonight, and that's what we discussed, that it can't keep happening, that we can't get to this juncture. It's not a good way of process, and it's not a good form of how we're working together. So that's what we're going to nut out over the next few days.
But not by tomorrow. We'll wait a little bit longer. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not going to put a timeline on it, Sarah, but I can say that there's goodwill to do it.
Kevin Hogan, thank you very much for joining us fresh out of the meeting. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah.